If you're running marketing campaigns, you probably asked the $1 million question. So which channel is actually working? Is it my Facebook ads, my TV spots, the email campaign, or that billboard outside Wrigley Field? The truth is marketing is messy. We know that. People see multiple touch points before they buy. And with privacy laws and cookie deprecation, it's harder than ever to track the customer journey one-to-one. That's where media mix modeling comes in, a statistical approach that helps us measure and optimize marketing spend across channels. It's not new. In fact, companies have been doing it since the 1960s with TV and radio. But today it's making a huge comeback because it works without needing user level data. In this video, I'm going to take you end to end. The data you need, how the math works, how to read the results, and most importantly, how to use it to make better decisions with your budget. Part one, what is media mix modeling? Media mix modeling is a statistical technique that links marketing inputs like ad spend across TV, radio, search, display, social, and whatnot, to business outcomes like sales, leads, or signups. It's a statistical method, often built with regression, that measures how different marketing channels contribute to business outcomes like sales, leads, or app downloads. You're essentially building a model where marketing inputs like dollars spent on TV, radio, search, social, email are your predictors, and your business outcome, which is sales, revenue, conversions, become your dependent variable. So why does it matter? MMM is especially useful when you can't track users one-to-one because of privacy laws, cookies disappearing, or just the complexity of offline channels. Part two, data requirements. There's three primary inputs. The first is marketing spend by channel. This could be daily, weekly, monthly, depending on how granular you can get. The second is business outcomes, which might include sales, leads, or signups, or some other form of conversions. Then we have to factor in control variables, things like seasonality, pricing, promotions, holidays, macro trends, and other economic variables that might be of impact. This is likely the most critical area where domain knowledge plays a significant role. First, let's go through marketing inputs. So this is the spend and activity data. This is the core ingredient of MMM, the actual marketing activity you're trying to measure. So first we have spend data. How much you spent, how much per channel, per time period. Usually you want weekly granularity. Daily is ideal. Monthly sometimes is too coarse, and we'll kind of walk this back a few different ways when we look at what it actually converts to in the output. So your channels might include TV, radio, print, digital, like search, display, social, video, email, and out of home, like billboards or transit ads, and then influencer campaigns. Then you've got an impression or GRP data. This is optional. So this is for channels like TV or YouTube. You might track impressions or gross rating points instead of raw spend. What this does is it helps normalize across different media buying markets where a dollar buys very different exposure levels. So for example, week one, we might have 50 grand on TV, 30 grand on search, 20 grand on Facebook, and 10 grand on email. Well, week two, we might do 75 on TV, 25 on search, 25 on Facebook, and 12 on email. The second thing, and the most important thing, this is the thing you care about, which is the outcome variable. So MMM is only as good as the outcome you're trying to measure. This is your dependent variable. Most common outcomes we're going to use are your revenue or sales volume. These would be the most common. Then conversions, which would be like signups, app installs, form fills, whatnot, and then leads generated. So to granularity, you really want to align with your spend data. If your spend is weekly, your outcome should be weekly sales, not daily. And then so your adjusted measures, so net of returns or refunds, and then, sometimes modeled as incremental revenue rather than sales itself. So let's take an example. If your weekly sales average 2 million, you want to see how much of that can be explained by marketing versus a baseline of seasonality. Third thing is the contextual factors. These are your control variables. So this is where the magic happens. If you leave these out, you end up giving marketing credit for things you didn't actually drive. So we've got a few different things here. First is seasonality. It's looking at the week of the year, your month dummy variables or 4-year terms. We're capturing recurring patterns. So like holidays, back to school, tax refund season. At the point of this writing, it might be a Labor Day sale, for example. Pricing and promotions. So discounts, coupons, buy one, get one offers, free shipping campaigns. If you don't control for this, your model might say search ads caused the spike, when really it's just the promotion at 30% off. Distribution and availability. So where were your products in stock? Did you expand to new stores or markets? So for example, adding 50 new Walmart locations can cause a lift in sales independent of advertising just by input nature. Macroeconomic indicators. These are like unemployment rate, consumer confidence, Inflation, gas prices being one of the key factors to track where the general economy is going. Jobs report also might be something worth considering. So this is particularly important for industries like automotive, housing, travel, anything that's commodity based is significantly important with your macroeconomic indicators just to control for. And then if you have it available, competitor activity. So if you happen to know your competitor ad spend, whether they had a product launch or any price cut or any promotion that they ran, it's likely very hard to get. But if you do have access, it can be very powerful. And you can actually conduct studies where you can simulate that as well. All right, next to the external events, these are your wild cards. So sometimes the world's throwing in variables that have nothing to do with your budget, but everything to do with your sales. So this is the two biggest things that I see are holidays. So your Black Friday, your Christmas, Easter, 4th of July, I just mentioned Labor Day, and then weather. So your weather shocks, one of the most significant things, especially commodity based, like a restaurant specifically, anything that's high competition, weather shocks are going to knock you for a loop. It tends to be one of the most consistent things I see come up. Snowstorms boosting hot chocolate sales, hurricanes increasing bottled water demand. Those are extreme examples, but weather takes a significant impact in consumer behavior. And then major events like sports championships, political elections, celebrity endorsements. So the Cubs winning the World Series in 2016, we saw local beer sales and merchandise spike, regardless of ad spend. Now looking at data quality and granularity requirements. So that ideally you want 2 to 3 years of historical data. Weekly is best. Daily can be too noisy and monthly is probably too coarse. You want a level of consistency, so the same definitions over time. So if digital spend included Instagram 1 year, but not in the next, it's going to distort your model. You know that. And then normalization, you want to adjust for inflation or currency changes if you're modeling over long periods or across countries and whatnot, where currency is a factor. Then some optional enhancements, if you happen to have them. Do you have digital clicks and views, which can improve precision for online channels? Do you have any brand equity measures? So awareness scores, brand lift survey results. Do you have CRM data? Do you have customer segments, retention and acquisition outcomes, customer lifetime value? And then any lag structure, what I'm going to get into pretty heavy detail here in a minute, but it's pre-computed ad stock variables for each channel. Though some would prefer to let the model estimate decay naturally. So when I teach MMM, I always tell my students the model itself is rarely the hard part. The hardest part is building the right data set. If your inputs are sloppy, if you're missing weeks, you're inconsistent definitions, some of the examples that I used about whether or not you included Instagram in that spend or not in prior months or prior years, your outputs are going to be misleading. It's really just garbage in, garbage out. But if you build a strong input data set, MMM can be one of the most powerful tools in all of marketing science. Part 3, pre-processing the data. So first we want to clean the data. We're handling missing data, be it spend, whether there's some lag in spend, which we might smooth in some form of some noisy series. We also want to consider whether we want to do lag or square root transformations to deal with any skew or kurtosis. Then we want to consider the lagging or ad stock factors. So marketing doesn't just work instantly. We know that. A TV ad may influence purchases over several weeks. So we want to use ad stock functions to model delayed effects. And then finally, we want to consider saturation. So each additional dollar in spend doesn't always deliver the same return. So think in terms of diminishing return curves. So first, let's start with the distinction. In media mix modeling, we often talk about two related ideas, lag and ad stock. Both deal with timing, but they capture very different patterns of how advertising works. So first, what is lag? So lag is your delay between when ads run and when the impact actually shows up in measurable form. So you're literally in the mechanics side of it. You want to shift the ad spend forward in time to match that effect. So for example, you're going to print, let's say an ad campaign in week 1. Let's say it's a print ad and people don't respond until week 3 when that specific magazine circulates widely. So you lag the spend variable by 2 weeks, and it's something you probably want to be able to observe. Now, what is ad stock? So ad stock says ads work right away and keep working for a while, but fade out gradually. So the mechanics behind this is you're going to use a decay factor so that each week's effect carries partially into the next. So for example, you're going to run a TV ad in week 1. Some people respond immediately. Others might respond over the next 2 to 3 weeks as the memory of the ad fades. So essentially, lagging says nothing happens right away. The effect kicks in later, whereas ad stock says the impact starts now, but continues to echo in the future. So lag is like planting a seed. Nothing happens for a bit, and suddenly the sprout appears, whereas ad stock's like ringing a bell. You hear that loud sound right away, then the ringing slowly fades away. So when to use which? So lag, you want to use, it's very useful for media where delivery is delayed. So print ads, magazines take time to reach households. Some sponsorship deals, those events happen maybe weeks later. So the actual spend attribution is going to have a lag period because of that. Then, but ad stock, so it's useful for media where impact is immediate, but it lingers. So TV, radio, YouTube ads, any out of home campaigns, like something on the L train in Chicago. And then sometimes you want to use both in combination. So, for example, a campaign might have a lag before it starts working, and then ad stock once it starts to kick in. Um, so you might roll out an ad. That ad takes 3 weeks to really kick in, and then you've got that decaying factor that contributes in the weeks following up to the point of diminishing returns. So lagging and ad stock are different ways of capturing dynamics in a marketing mix model. Lag is about when the effect starts. Ad stock is about how long the effect lasts. Get these wrong and you're going to risk over or under crediting channels. So let me expand on ad stock and why you need it. When you run an ad, the impact doesn't just happen in the moment. Think about the last time you saw a car commercial. Obviously, you didn't buy a car in that second, but maybe the idea stuck in your head. You saw the ad again the next week, and by the third exposure, you're at the dealership. That's the idea behind ad stock. Advertising has carryover effects that decay over time. Without ad stock, the model assumes spend only works instantaneously, whereas with ad stock, we capture the delayed effect and persistence of ads in consumers' minds. So when you run an ad, the impact doesn't just happen in the moment. So now to the concept of decay. So ad stock models how advertising impact fades, like the echo of a sound, loud at first, then fading gradually. So the decay rate, which is your lambda value, is a parameter between 0 and 1. So we might say 0.5 suggests 50% of the impact carries to the next week. 0.8 says 80% carries over, which is a slower decay, whereas a 0.2, which is a quick decay and then short-lived ads. And then that recursive formula looks as the following. So the ad stock at that particular time period is equal to the spend of that time period plus that lambda value times the ad stock at that time period minus 1. So in interpretation, if you spend $100 this week and your lambda value is 0.5, then $50,000 worth of effect carries into the next week, plus whatever you spend again on top of that. Now to the half-life interpretation. So marketers often talk about the half-life of advertising. This is how long before half the effect is gone, which is a scientific term. So you can see the formula here, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but take, for example, if your lambda value is 0.5, half the effect is gone in 1 week. But if the lambda value is 0.8, half the effect takes about 3 weeks for it to kick in. And now to saturation with the ad stock. So this is where the real world kicks in. So this is where your nuance is. Not only do ads carry over, they also saturate. So adding more spend doesn't linearly add more impact. You see this a lot in YouTube ads, which I've learned the right way and the wrong way at the same time. So your first exposures are where your big impact is. Your later exposures are where we see diminishing returns. But when we combine ad stock, which is the time effect, with saturation, which is your total volume effect, it gives us the most realistic picture. Let's take a realistic example. So let's say you're running a new restaurant in Chicago and you spend $20,000 on radio ads this week. If you had a decay of 0.6, here's what happens. So the week 1 is that all upfront impact of $20,000. Week 2 is going to be $12,000 because it's 0.6 times 20. Whereas week 3 is going to carry from week 2 into week 3 and multiply it by that decay effect of 0.6. And then week 4 is going to be 4.3 carryover. So that one campaign is still nudging people almost a month later, just with smaller and smaller influence over time. So why does it matter for different channels? So TV and radio, we've got strong ad stock with weeks of influence. Digital search, however, very low ad stock. People search and buy right away. We see instant attribution most of the time. And then social media or video. So you got kind of more of a medium ad stock. Content may stick around for a few days. So this is why you don't use the same ad stock assumption across all channels. Search might decay almost instantly, while a big Super Bowl ad can ripple up to weeks. So when you first explain ad stock to executives, they're sometimes going to push back. Wait, are you telling me my ads work for weeks after I stop paying for them? Yes, that's the answer. But the effect decays. That's why MMM needs ad stock to reflect how humans actually process advertising over time. Not just as if, they're one-off spikes in and of themselves. Now, part four to the model build. So the general approach is to start with a multiple regression model with the target set as sales, for example, or any form of a conversion, whatnot, and the inputs being ad spend as well as all the control variables that we went over. So the equation might look like this. So your sales is equal to your base constant plus beta 1 times the TV spend, beta 2 times the radio, beta 3 times search, beta 4 times social, plus the controls and all of what goes into those, and then your error terms. So we can consider also a few other alternatives that would prop up to the advanced categories. Best practice historically suggests that linear regression is right. We've really come a long way in terms of capabilities from a modeling perspective and computation. So if we have some level of priors and some level of understood uncertainty, we might consider Bayesian media mix modeling, or we might consider a machine learning approach like a regularized regression or gradient boosting. The net result is the coefficients tell us essentially how much incremental lift each channel contributes, holding all others constant. And if you want a video which walks through a coefficient table breakdown, you can check this one out right here. Now to part 5, model diagnostics. So why do diagnostics matter? Building a model is easy. Building a model you can trust is pretty difficult. Diagnostics then are essentially the tests that we run to make sure our media mix model isn't just spitting out numbers, but actually reflecting reality. Think of it like a doctor checkup for your model. We want to check its health across multiple dimensions. So let's go through the model diagnostic features individually. So first is the goodness of fit. This is your explained variance. So this is your R square and adjusted R square. R square is the percent of variance out of sales that is explained by your model terms, and then your adjusted R square corrects for adding too many variables. The rule of thumb in media mix modeling is some best practice, and there's some variability to this, but 0.6 to 0.9 is typical. Once you get to 1, it's virtually an accounting equation, and it's a perfect equation. This is extremely rare in and of itself. So you're probably going to see values that are more towards the center between 0.6, maybe 0.5 to 0.75. So I would say a point of caution, a high R square doesn't always mean the model is good. You could completely overfit, and then it's not going to be usable over time as you vary up your inputs. A good visual for this might be a scatter plot of predicted versus actual sales with utilizing that diagonal perfect fit line to see how that tracks. So in MMM, you don't just want a model that fits the past perfectly. You want one that generalizes the future well. So George Box's concept of all models are wrong, some models are useful. And if you want a video summary here that further explains goodness of fit and all those other terms, you can check that out. Next, out of sample validation. So what we want to do is we're going to apply the holdout method. So we might consider training on 80% of historical data and then test on the last 20%. And then what we're going to do is we're going to compare predictions. If the model predicts well out of sample, it's going to be considered robust. So we know we've got something that is good to work out. If your model nails the training period but falls apart on the holdout, it's memorizing history instead of learning relationships, and then we need to reevaluate it. Next, multicollinearity. So problem here is that many channels move together. So you often see an increase in digital and TV at the same time. Essentially what this suggests is the model can't separate which channel is truly driving impact. And the way to diagnose this is two things. So the variance inflation factor, and then the correlation matrix of input variables in which you can see the best practices here, and then some fixes we might use like a regularization model, like a ridge or a lasso regression, and then channel grouping. So we might lump digital display and video together if we know that we have the domain knowledge and understanding that we can be able to do that. Multicollinearity is like trying to figure out which twin ate the cookies when they both have crumbs on their face. The model struggles to tell them apart. If you want to check out a further video on collinearity diagnostics and how to diagnose those in a model appropriately, you can check this one out here. Next, we have coefficient plausibility. So you want to check the direction of your coefficients. Do the signs they have make sense? So if search ads have a negative coefficient, that's a pretty big red flag unless there's a clear story that you can observe. I'd see this oftentimes with clients that say, hey, our ads cause sales to go down. And it's It's not, in fact, true. It's that we're just not controlling for certain factors in the model, notably seasonality or some level of event that might be structured, which is when you might actually want to try to figure out a way to smooth the inputs of that model itself. So, from a business sense, you want to compare results with known benchmarks, maybe even industry ROIs, previous campaigns that you have, whatnot. So, this is where statistics actually meet common sense. If your model says print ads are your number one channel in 2025, probably should pause before reallocating your budget. Okay, next to residual diagnostics. So, the residuals are your actual minus your predicted in each case level. So, what we want to look for, we want to see random scatter. That would mean it's good. We want to see patterns. So, in other words, do residual spike during holidays? Suggests we have missing variables. And then trends suggest that we have structural problems. So, we might use a visual like a residual plot showing holiday spikes, which would suggest we miss a dummy variable controlling for holiday season. Residuals are like your model's confession. So, if there are patterns in the errors, your model is ultimately probably hiding some. If you want to check out another video on residuals and residual diagnostics, you can find that here. Now to stability over time. So we want to check coefficients across sub-periods itself. So we might run a model from 2019 to 2021 versus 2022 to 2024. Are the coefficients stable or is TV ROI wildly different? So why does this matter? Well, channels evolve. TikTok in 2020 is nothing near what it is now in 2025. So essentially, what we want to do is allow our parameters to vary or refresh the model regularly if we have the ability to do so. Next to contribution decomposition. So what we want to do is ensure the breakdown of base sales versus incremental sales looks reasonable. So for example, if 90% of sales are attributed to marketing and only 10% to baseline, your model is definitely overclaiming. It's rarely, if ever, seen any business vertical or any organization that can argue that 90%, even 60% of their sales are attributed to marketing itself. So the typical range you're going to see is probably between 10 and 40%, but really depending on industry. And then finally, to overfitting and parsimony. So your warning sign tends to be that if you have too many variables in your model, you're probably just explaining tiny pieces of it and you're reducing your ability to reutilize that model in the future. So we want to keep it as simple as possible while still optimizing, maximizing accuracy. So for example, like an analogy here. So a GPS with too many waypoints can really get you lost. So it's really as simple as saying the shortest path is often the best. So the diagnostics checklist is really about balance. You want a model that fits well, predicts well, has coefficients that make sense, residuals that are clean, and results that business leaders can trust. Without diagnostics, you risk essentially building what I call a statistical Rube Goldberg machine. A whole lot of math, but not much insight. All right, part 6, results in ROI calculations. So now we want to use the coefficients in ROI. So if $1,000 in social ads generates $5,000 in sales according to your regression model, your ROI is 5x. From here, we might consider a channel contribution chart like a waterfall or pie chart. We want to show incremental sales versus base sales. So what we have now is the bridge from math to marketing itself. Up to now, we've been in the weeds of data prep, ad stock, and regression, but stakeholders don't care about lambda values. They don't care about variance inflation factors. They care about answers. So which channels are working, which aren't, and where should we spend more? This is where interpretation really comes in. So MMM doesn't live in a vacuum. The model says TikTok ROI is 5x, but your brand team tells you TikTok is just driving awareness and not conversions. You need to reconcile the stats with your strategy. Interpretation here means blending quantitative output with business reality. Now turning coefficients into ROI. So raw coefficient meaning, if you've got a linear model, it suggests that incremental sales per unit of spend versus a log-log regression would suggest a percent change in sales for a percent change in spend. So the translation process here is you take that coefficient for a channel, you multiply by the average spend, which is your incremental sales generated, and divide incremental sales by spend to net your ROI. So for example, let's say your coefficient for paid search in a log-log model is 0.04. So the interpretation for that would be a 1% increase in paid search spend is about a 0.04% increase in sales. So with a $100,000 spend, that equates to $400,000 in incremental sales with an ROI of 4x. Next to baseline versus incremental sales. So baseline is your base demand. This is sales that would have happened anyway without marketing. Where incremental sales is the lift generated by marketing. So if you sell $10,000 of product or service a month and MMM says 2.5 million is incremental, that means marketing is responsible for 25 of your sales. The general rule of thumb, as I've noted prior, is that incremental often falls between 10 and 40% of total sales, depending on the category of vertical you're in. Next to channel contribution analysis. So what we want to do is show which channels are driving the incremental pie. So for example, let's say paid search is 35% of incremental sales, TV is 25, social is 20, email 10, and everything else is 10. This is where MMM really shines. You can show the CMO that while TV spends the most, paid search is actually pulling the biggest incremental weight. Now to marginal ROI versus average ROI. So average ROI is the total incremental spend, or excuse me, total incremental revenue divided by the spend. The marginal ROI is the return from spending the next dollar itself. So for example, let's say paid search, your average ROI is 4x, but marginal ROI might only be 1.5 because you've already saturating the channel itself. Whereas TV, your ROI might be 2x, but marginal could be 3x if you've been overspending. So this all matters because budget decisions are about the next dollar, not the last one you used. Now to scenario planning with ROI. So let's go to a what if analysis before we get into the full details of it. So what if we shift $200,000 from TV into paid search? Or what if we cut display by half and reinvest in email? What we're looking to do here is do optimization, use solver or algorithms to maximize ROI subject to total budget constraints. And then essentially what we've got is a recommended reallocation of your projected gains, giving your inputs that you're going to adjust in your what if scenario. So some quick pitfalls in ROI that are worthy of discussing. So first is over attribution. If your controls are missing, ROI is probably going to be completely overshot. Double counting, we're going to try to avoid avoiding summing ROI across channels because overlaps can't exist. Any unrealistic ROI. So if a channel shows 20x ROI, ask, is it a true outlier or a data or modeling error itself? And then short-term versus long-term ROI. So MMM typically captures short to medium-term sales, not customer lifetime value or LTV. Now to part 7, scenario planning and optimization, which we alluded to in the prior section. But now we want to consider some what if simulations. So what if I moved 100,000 from TV to search? So from here, we want to consider some optimization algorithms or a solver to maximize ROI under budget constraints. Our real world application result is annual budget planning, maybe mid-year reallocations, or even campaign level decisions. So here's an analogy you might use to distinguish the two. So scenario planning is like test driving a vehicle. You're seeing how each car is handling its curves, its bumps, how its suspension performs, whatnot. Whereas optimization is choosing the best car for the road trip itself. You still need to consider luggage space, comfort, and style, just not top speed. You're trying to get it for what's going to fit within your budget constraint and everything else that you're trying to optimize for. So scenario planning optimization are where MMM delivers its best business value. It's not about the R square. It's about showing if we spend differently tomorrow, what could happen? That's the bridge from analytics to action itself. MMM isn't just a rear view mirror. It's a GPS. So once we understand how channels perform, we can simulate what happens if we shift dollars around, cut budgets, or even double down. That's scenario planning and optimization. This is why scenario planning matters. So the what ifs about scenario planning. So what we're doing is we're using the model to simulate outcomes under different spend allocations. So what if we cut TV by 20% and reinvest in paid search? What if the total budget drops 15% next quarter? Or what if we double our spend on email but hold everything else flat? Essentially what our value is it lets decision makers see projected trade-offs before committing to any real dollars and putting budget behind it. Revisiting marginal versus average ROI scenarios. So average is your past return overall, whereas marginal is return from the next dollar spent. So scenarios rely on marginal ROI curves or the diminishing returns. So for example, similar to what we've already done here, paid search ROI, let's say an average is 4x, but marginal ROI at current spend is 1.5. But TV might be a 2x, but marginal ROI is 3x if underspent. So essentially, what we interpret this to be is optimization might suggest cutting paid search, even though its average ROI is higher because it's already saturated. Now to optimization, which is your best mix. So what we're doing is we're finding the budget allocation across channels that maximizes ROI or sales given the constraints you have to work with. So your methods are your linear programming, nonlinear optimization, or even heuristic solvers. So our constraints we want to consider to include the total budget cap, so you're max out, minimum or maximum spend per channel. So like a TV contracts require minimums that you have to opt into. And then your strategic weight. So let's say you must keep 10% in brand channels, for example. Then the types of analyses we can actually run in optimization. So we've got single period, which is how you reallocate spend for next quarter. You might go multi-period optimization, where you plan out the next 12 months with changing budgets. You might go shock testing, which is what happens if your budget is cut by 30%. Which channels do you want to protect? And then growth testing. What's the best allocation if your budget doubles? So let's take an example of a Chicago brand store. So imagine you're managing the marketing spend for a Chicago coffee chain. Your current spend looks like this. So let's say you've got $1 million in TV, $500,000 in paid search, 400 in social media and email at 100. Let's say your marketing mix model says marginal ROI curves look like this. Your TV grows sharply after 1 million, so that would suggest you still have room. Your search already flattened at 500, so you might just be holding firm. Social is still getting strong returns, and then email very high ROI but caps quickly. So when we run an optimization with maybe a $2 million budget, the solver might say, reduce paid search to 300, increase TV to 1.2, boost social to 500, and keep email at 100. And then in doing so, our projected sales lift is about plus 8%, give or take, within the same budget. Now, finally, some limitations and cautions that we have about what ifs and optimization. So you might have over optimization risk. So models can spit out extreme allocations. So 90% of spend into one channel. So you want to use guardrails. So we want to be realistic, use our domain, and use your other teams that can help inform what you're doing in your strategy. Forgetting brand effects. MMM usually captures short-term sales, but optimization might recommend cutting long-term brand channels like TV. You might have practical constraints. So media buying isn't perfectly flexible. You may be locked into contracts. And then stability. If you optimize too aggressively, a small model error can have a big consequence. So optimization essentially should be a decision support tool, and it's not an autopilot button. Now to strengths and limitations. So there are 3 primary strengths. 1, this method, MMM, works across offline and online. Second, it's privacy safe, meaning we don't need user level data. And third, it's useful for long-term strategy. But there are 3 primary drawbacks though. The biggest challenge is a model of this type needs a lot of historical data, ideally 2 to 3 years. Additionally, results can be slow, up to weeks, even months to build. And third, the approach is not ideal for real-time decision-making, which we would substitute for attribution modeling. So in closing, that's the end-to-end journey of media mix modeling, from gathering data to pre-processing, building the model, interpreting results, and optimizing spend. Done right, can help you answer the billion-dollar question in marketing. What's working, what's not, and where should we spend next? This breakdown helped. Hit subscribe for more deep dives into analytics, modeling, and marketing science. Drop a comment if you want to see a hands-on MMM build in R, Python, or even Excel. See you next time.